You know, why don't we get started? And I know more people are going to be coming in, but just for our presenters, since there's a fairly small group here right now, maybe you could just say who you are and whom you're with. And so, Tina, do you want to just start?
Sure. Tina McGinnis, Gunnison Valley Mentors. Hi, everybody.
Hello. Kristen, who are you?
Kristen Ingo, West Elk Soccer Association.
Soccer, okay. James, do you want to just introduce yourself if you're there?
Sure, and do you have my video or is it just a black screen?
It's a black screen, but very minimalist, quite beautiful.
Yes, thank you. So my name is James Grau, and I'm on the grant research team, the volunteer group through Arden that he put together.
Oh, that's great. Josh, do you want to just say who you are? Okay, he may not be there quite yet. Josh?
Your screen. For folks, just to note generally, I am going to be recording this time together, not to share.
I muted that. Josh wrote into the chat. He's sorry, his mic isn't working. It's Josh Futterman with Travel Crested Butte.
Sweet.
Okay.
Sasha, and who are you with?
Oh, I just came here on my own accord.
Great.
I work for Mountain Roots Food Project, and I just signed on with the Gunnison Public Lands Initiative as well.
Awesome. And there's somebody whose screen says Samsung, whoever you are. Okay. So we decided to have this session, which I mentioned is being recorded, and I think a lot of people will want to access it later, on collaboration, because I think, frankly, it's the name of the game for funders these days. There's so much urgent need for so many things right now, and one strategy that funders have is trying to address needs by funding several nonprofits at once. But how does collaboration work? Because it's one of those words that is used in every way by everyone. For some people, saying we collaborate means we took out an ad together in the Country Times. For others, saying we collaborate means they fund me. And for others, it's a more complicated agency to agency relationship. And so I thought I would start by asking four people who represent one of those complicated and also very successful collaborations, just to talk a bit about what they do. The project is called The Wet Meadows, and it's an amazing story that I'm learning every day. I'll start by saying when I worked for the State Council on the Arts, we got a really big grant from the National Endowment for the Arts to work on an arts education program with the State Department of Education. And that sounds very simple, but it was really complicated in a good way, but a lot of things had to be worked out. For example, because we were the arts organization and got the grant from the arts organization, it meant that when we hired a staff, the staff would work for the Arts Council. But the Department of Education, who was the co-equal on all of this with us, and our advisory committee insisted quite rightly that we hire an educator. And so suddenly you had an educator who was of the world of the Colorado Department of Education working and reporting to me, an arts person. And we had completely different vocabularies. We had different standards of getting things done. And it was really, really complicated. And I could go on forever and ever, but let's hear about a story from this valley. I will say it worked in large part because the director that we hired and Chuck from the Department of Education and I had a common interest in beer. And so quite a lot of time was spent trying to work things out informally in order to present them more formally to our agencies. So it's a multifaceted thing. So I want to introduce our wonderful panelists. We have Paul Jones, who works for the Upper Gunnison Water Conservancy River District. Anyway, you know what it is.
Upper Gunnison River Water Conservancy District.
Spoken like a true board member of the Upper Gunnison, George Sibley. And we have Nate and Andrew, who are feds, one with the BLM and one with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. So we have a sort of an agenda, and since it's a small group, I think we'll have plenty of time for questions. So Andrew and Nate, do you want to just get us started? What in the heck is this thing?
Well, first of all, again, Nate Seward. I'm the wildlife conservation biologist for Colorado Parks and Wildlife here for the Colorado state government. And yeah, this project really has its roots going all the way back to 2009, 2010, thanks to the Nature Conservancy coming down. And yep, George is holding it up right now. The Climate Change Adaptation Workshop is what they held for us. And
It's backwards.
basically that brought all the partners, state, federal, some of our nonprofit groups as well, agricultural producers, some recreation groups, all to the table to kind of really have that difficult conversation of what climate change could do to the Gunnison Basin, what kind of impacts, and what could we possibly do on the ground to address those potential impacts. One of the kind of key issues that rose to the top was Gunnison sage grouse, which obviously is near and dear to my heart, being Colorado Parks and Wildlife, the wildlife interests. And so when I started with Colorado Parks and Wildlife, my predecessor, who actually was Paul Jones, and now we've kind of come full circle, and we've got him back now as our wet meadow coordinator. It's pretty neat. Paul had secured a pretty large grant, and I was working with the hydrologist for the Bureau of Land Management at the time to do some wet meadow riparian restoration work so that we could improve habitat for the Gunnison sage grouse, specifically that late brood rearing summer fall habitat. Sorry. And improving habitat for Gunnison sage grouse, and again, that's focusing on those wet meadows, which provides the forbs, those flowering plants, and all the insects that Gunnison sage grouse use for food. The big objective there was to provide more food, but obviously enhance chick survival, which would ultimately lead to better recruitment into the population and hopefully start to really bolster these populations. So that's a lot. I know Andrew also has a good history of the background, so I will let.
Thanks, Nate. So my name is Andrew Breitbart. I'm a hydrologist at the Bureau of Land Management, managing public lands in the upper Gunnison River, over by Silverton, and then the upper Gunnison River Basin, upstream of Bull Mesa Reservoir, and parts of the Little Cimarron River. And Nate mentioned a hydrologist, and that person preceded me. And so, this project started right when I got on board here with the BLM, coming from the Forest Service in 2009. And so, I've been kind of thinking about climate change, and at that time, we're trying to integrate climate change into our NEPA documents with the Forest Service, and it was very vague. It was just very ambiguous. We didn't really understand what that meant. And, I was really stoked, that, hey, we have a climate change adaptation project here, and we have the Nature Conservancy that's leading the way. And then, but what they're doing is that they're incorporating all the stakeholders here. Nate said, everyone who, who's involved, participated in that. And so, working with, being a hydrologist and working for the Forest Service, you know, I work, you know, in moving water. I never really thought I'd be working with wildlife biologists or, you know, really working towards restoring, you know, wildlife habitat. But the thing about it though is this brooding habitat, it's mesic meadows. And so meadows are sponges. And so that's hydrology. And so there's that connection there because we've lost, you know, the sponge effect. And, you know, it's not just here, but we do have a lot of degraded sponges. And so that's what we've been doing is working cooperatively, you know, focus on the Gunnison sage-grouse. Do you have a question? Oh, maybe something else. And so this partnership has allowed us to do that across the landscape. And so what's really cool about this project, and I'm coming from the Forest Service of California, where pretty much we manage the whole watersheds, or we just manage like, you know, the top of the watershed. So we really didn't, you know, there was partnerships, you know, in the Sierra Nevada, in the Lassen, but pretty much at that time, you know, we controlled the water, we controlled the resources. Here, the BLM is scattered. You know, we have kind of like the low elevation land, we have some high elevation land, but it's mixed. And so in order to do stuff on the landscape, you know, we've partnered up, you know, we've kind of like, you know, when we do this work, we are working across fence lines. You know, we don't even think there's fence lines there. We just kind of, here's the watershed. Okay, there's Forest Service land up top. Here's a little BLM. Here's a little Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Here's a private rancher. And so we just work the whole system, and it's working cooperatively, and, you know, and just kind of helping each other out. And just kind of like we're working, you know, with our, you know, internal kind of systems, but also kind of bringing that to the table and working together to accomplish the main goal, which is to kind of like, it's really to kind of maintain the hydrology and restore the hydrology of these mesic meadows, which are critical for brooding habitat for Gunnison sage grouse. They're also, you know, are critical for the livelihoods of, you know, the ranching community here, providing forage, and also provide habitat for, you know, deer, elk, some amphibians, you know, and salamanders. So it's really the holistic approach here that we're taking. And we're also looking at it from, you know, just not the meadows, but just looking at the road network here. Is the road, you know, the road network trailing caused by livestock and other wild ungulates have really, you know, caused the degradation of these systems. And for this forum, I mean, we can talk about what that degradation is, but I'm just gonna leave it there and let someone else speak here.
Nate, do you have anything to add before we pass it to George?
Well, I'll piggyback off Andrew that yes, Gunnison sage grouse was kind of one of the big objectives of trying to improve that habitat. But as Andrew just mentioned, this isn't single species management. This kind of work is obviously it's improving the hydrologic function back in that landscape. It's having again a larger landscape enhancement effect. So we're not just improving it for Gunnison sage grouse, but Andrew said deer and elk winter range. It's improving habitat for salamanders, chorus frogs. Just these improving the function of these wet meadows is holding more water in that system. It's making it more productive. We're improving water quality, but we're also, by retaining more water in the system and resaturating these sponges, we're actually releasing that water through that system further into the growing season, later into the summer. And so it really is having a great benefit on the vegetation in those systems, which it does. It just has a trophic cascade effect all the way up. So thanks, Andrew, for making that point.
So George, then I would ask you, what Nate just said made it sound like it's something that the Upper Gunnison board would be all over. Sounds like it's totally up the Upper Gunnison's alley. Tell us about what happened.
Well, Upper Gunnison was a little late to the feast, actually. I went to that workshop that the Nature Conservancy, and the Nature Conservancy's role in this was big. We had a woman named Betsy Neely who just worked to put people together on this. And that workshop in 2009, I had never seen so many people. We had across fence lines, as Andrew said. There were the Gunnison County stock growers were present, the Upper Gunnison. I was the representative for the Upper Gunnison, and the college was there, and the college has been a participant in this pretty much from the start, with volunteer crews coming out from classes and that kind of thing. Bureau of Land Management, the Forest Service, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, all of these people in the same room trying to figure out how do we deal with this vague thing, this climate change, which was, you know, a decade ago. We've learned a lot since then, but the important thing came down to everybody was in the valley was thinking about the Gunnison sage grouse at that time, because it was in danger of being declared endangered. And we didn't want that to happen because of some things that get put into play when you have an endangered species. And so we wanted to try to save it before it became officially endangered. And that, to some extent, it's kind of like the canary in the coal mine. Now, if the canary died, you knew it was time for everybody to get out of the coal mine because there was a gas problem. And the sage grouse has been our canary in the coal mine to bring our attention together around a lot of things that need to be worked on in this valley in terms of developing a more resilient and stable ecosystems for the future that's coming, which we know a little bit about, but not everything. So anyway, the Upper Gunnison was originally reluctant once the project got going around 2012. The Upper Gunnison was hard to talk into participating because of a kind of a long-standing philosophical problem between a lot of the local water users, mainly ranchers, and the land management agencies, the Bureau of Land Management and the Forest Service especially. There had been protagonistic relationships to some extent in the past. Much of that had been worked out by the 50s and 60s, but it was still the feeling on the Upper Gunnison board when I brought this up as something that we should be helping support. I mean, our mission is to be an active leader in all issues affecting the water resources of the Upper Gunnison River Basin. And here was a big collaborative landscape scale thing that was going on, and we weren't really being part of it. And we should have been. We're a tax supported nonprofit. We have a mill levy, mostly to protect the water resources of the Upper Gunnison, but there are a lot of different ways of doing that. So we, I finally talked the board into helping buy some rock. They weren't going to put anything into the administration and the execution of this thing, but we would help buy some of the rock for the One Rock dams that were being constructed. And that was sort of the camel getting his nose under the tent. And the next thing that happened, a year or so later, Frank Kugel and myself, were able to talk the board into sponsoring 1 week of work on the project by the Western Colorado Conservation Corps. And they have been working, they're paid crews. They are based in Grand Junction, but they always try to hire in the Upper Gunnison too, and try to get at least one crew together from the Upper Gunnison. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But at any rate, we sponsored 1 week of the 5 or 6 weeks that the Western Colorado Conservation Corps puts in on this Wet Meadows project. When the Nature Conservancy funded this project pretty much single-handedly with help from us, and then all of the money that Andrew's organization and Nate's and the Forest Service put into it in the way of materials and time and such like. But the Nature Conservancy was only going to do this for 5 years. Then if it was going to continue, we would have to take over the coordination locally somehow. And I remember a phone meeting, I think in December of, I don't know, what was that, 2015 or 16? At any rate, there was a discussion of who should be the responsible for coordination, and the Jim Cochran, who was the Gunnison County sage grouse coordinator, said, well, it really ought to be the Upper Gunnison. And I remember Frank sitting there and looking at me, and we both had that deer caught in the headlights look. But we basically agreed that, yeah, that's what the Upper Gunnison ought to be doing in the valley, is trying to help pull together and hold together these kinds of landscape level, fence line crossing, boundary crossing projects that look at the basin as a whole. And this is, so that was when we hired Paul to come back to work in the valley, and on a slightly different level from his old Parks and Wildlife. So with that, I'll turn it over to Paul now.
And before he gets to talk, can I just ask, so the Upper Gunnison put up the money for the salary, is that right?
Yeah. Yes, we put up the money for the salary for the coordinator.
And Andrew and Nate, what were your agencies putting up?
Well, Parks and Wildlife, through our wetland grant program, contributed some of the initial money. We contributed about 45 grand. And that really helped kind of get that initial demonstration project off the ground. Again, on a couple private ranches is where we started, and that was just to help clear some of the hurdles with NEPA as far as doing it on public land. Once we were able to show what these restoration structures would look like, George mentioned a one rock dam. There's a whole suite of simple rock structures that we use to slow the water down, get it up and out of these incised channels, and get the water spread back onto what's now considered floodplain, but it's essentially the historic surface of these wet meadows. So what we're doing is getting that water up, spreading it, resaturating the sponge of these meadows through simple rock and wood structures. And we're using these techniques that are developed by Bill Zedike. Bill's out of New Mexico, works in, I'll say, flashier systems overall, but he's essentially a wildlife biologist by trade, retired, had a whole another 30-year career after that, doing this kind of riparian restoration work. So Parks and Wildlife is putting in your time and some cash? Sweet. Absolutely. My kind of expertise on the wildlife side, some funding to help buy the materials or pay for some of these youth crews. But really, I'd say the yeoman's effort has really come from the BLM, and Andrew has been extremely successful in tapping into a variety of different funds. So
Andrew, what's the BLM putting up? Or I'm sorry, yeah.
Yeah, it just depends. So, you know, since 2013, between 2013 and 2007, February of 2017, the funds were coming out of a climate change program. But, and so we've been, you know, and then, you know, all the funds have been coming out of endangered species funds, guns and sage grouse. So, you know, and so the funds vary. So, you know, my whole ideal and my philosophy is if you don't ask, you won't get a yes or a no. And so, you know, and so having the first demonstration project done in 2012 on private land allowed us to kind of do the NEPA work. And so we're, you know, continuously getting funded. And so the BLM, you know, we have our annual funds that come in, and then we have these kind of like all of a sudden, well, for instance, right now with the whole potential move of the Washington staff to GJ, which is, you know, there's extra funds coming, and it's been happening. So, you know, whenever they put out a call, it's just like, you know, we've got a project. They see the partners. And that's the key thing. They see that this is an on-the-ground project, and it's full of partners who are all contributing in kind, and also cash and securing grants. And so that's been, you know, that's been the easy sell. And that's, you know, with the BLM. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you recreate on BLM, and it's just like you see public lands adjacent to private lands. And so that partnership is critical, you know, to the management of the BLM. And so that's also critical to the funding, and that's been successful. And I don't know if Paul is going to show a partner slide, but I brought up a PowerPoint, which really shows like who's involved, you know, in this project. And I can share that, you know, when you like, but you're only seeing like a few of us here. And,
that's awesome. So Paul, tell us more. And I'm especially curious, since so many different people are putting in different kinds of resources, but you are hired by the Upper Gunnison. What's it like working for all these masters? Is it a problem? How's decision-making done? Is it done by consensus or what? I mean, so tell us more.
Yeah, this is a really, as Nate said, I was with Parks and Wildlife for a long time prior to, I retired in 2018. Prior to that, I was the aquatic conservation biologist for the Southwest region. And then before that, I had Nate's position. Before that, I started out as a district wildlife manager when I first moved here in 1995. And that was right when the sage-grouse effort was really heating up. And, you know, I think the catalyst for this really started with that early collaborative process with the Gunnison Sage-Grouse Working Group, where we brought together really diverse groups of people. Anybody that had a potential role in grouse management or might be affected by grouse management was invited to the table, and trying to identify the big issues surrounding sage grouse and working towards ensuring that we didn't get a listing, or if we did get a listing, how could we deal with a listing in a way that would facilitate, allow continued use of the resources here in the Gunnison Basin. And through that process, we, you know, it started out, there was a lot of suspicion and controversy and whatnot, but through years of working together, and the timing was just perfect. It kind of built on itself. It was right about the same time that the Gunnison Ranchland Conservation Legacy was getting started, and Parks and Wildlife was interested in funding conservation easements. And so that kind of helped us start building relationships with agricultural landowners, and we slowly started building a relationship of trust where we could rely on each other. And so now, coming back to the sage grouse world, working for the Upper Gunnison River Water Conservancy District. This project is far beyond anything I ever envisioned when I first started out working on the first sage grouse meeting the first week I showed up in Gunnison back in March in 1995. It's, as Andrew said, the partners, we have kind of a core group of partners, which are obviously the agencies that manage land in the basin. So BLM, Forest Service, Parks and Wildlife to a smaller degree, just because they have a smaller subset of land, but Parks and Wildlife is the wildlife management agency. So Nate's role in providing science and background on the birds is really critical. But then we have the stock growers. We've, of course, got the Upper Gunnison, who funds the majority of my position. But then we have High Country Conservation Advocates. I still call them High Country Citizens Alliance, but they help volunteer. Western provides students. We interact with professors. We've had people through the MEM program doing their graduate work. Right now, Andrew has been doing a great job working with Jenny DeMarco, we're bringing on a graduate student who's going to try and help us see if we can quantify the amount of moisture we're actually holding in the soil in these projects, and how that relates to different plants that we're using to identify moisture. So there's this really wide group of people within the basin. And then one of Nature Conservancy's priorities was to spread this technology. We use the Gunnison Basin as kind of a working laboratory where we could proof some of these techniques and then take those techniques and spread them out. And the range of the Gunnison sage grouse covers all of southwestern Colorado. Historically, it included parts of southeastern Utah, northwestern New Mexico, and northeastern Arizona. Now, the largest population is here in the basin, but then there are still scattered populations in San Miguel County, Montezuma, Dolores County, parts of Montrose, Delta County, and then Mesa County. And there's these smaller pockets within that. And so some of our other partners include Delta County, San Miguel County, and then some private landowners, as well as BLM Forest Service folks in those areas as well. And I was just looking, I've been putting together a grant spreadsheet, and that looks at the money that we have available to us this next year or the next couple of years from Upper Gunnison, BLM, the BLM office here in Gunnison. We also have money associated with project outside of Silt. Parks and Wildlife, we've got money from two separate pots of money, the local HPP committee, as well as the Wetlands Initiative. And then Nate's counterpart down in Grand Junction, Dan Newbaum, has gotten a chunk of money for a project on a piece of private land down there. The Forest Service has contributed a significant amount, like Andrew's agency. That money has been spent on everything from portions of offsetting some of my contract, as well as providing money for equipment or materials, work crews. And one of the most important things that we have is our vegetation monitoring, which is how we measure success. If we can actually measure the expansion of those plants that are wetland dependent, we're able to demonstrate that we're achieving our goals. And so far, we're seeing a tremendous expansion of wetland vegetation in those project areas. Then each one of our partners as well are going out and seeking additional grants. Forest Service has gotten some grant funding through an outfit called the Tracy Aviary Fund for vegetation monitoring, as well as the National Forest Foundation and the National Wild Turkey Federation. Trout Unlimited got money from the Colorado Water Conservation Board, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Partners for Wildlife program has allocated $35,000 to the project, as well as getting some additional grant funding. And then the NRCS has local money as well as nationwide grant money. So right now, if all the grants come through that we have pending, we may have as much as almost, $943,000 is kind of the rough figure we have right now. So all of this money's coming in from all these different pots, and that money is going not only to projects here in the Gunnison Basin, but some of these other subpopulations. So it is kind of like herding cats, trying to stay on top of all these different things. But as far as decision making, it's the way most of the work has been done all along. We get down, sit down together, we present different potential projects, we prioritize them, and what we look at is those projects that we can get the biggest bang for the buck, and very often they'll start on Forest Service or BLM land and then move on to private land. The wonderful thing about this is that each of the partners has figured out a way to cut through some of the bureaucracy within each of our agencies, and we can spend money on the project rather than on the, say, BLM money on BLM ground or Parks and Wildlife money on Parks and Wildlife ground. We're able to spread that money out, and as a result, we can develop kind of watershed-based projects that give us the ability to affect large landscapes. It is challenging, but everybody that's involved is invested in the project. They're passionate about it. You know, working for state and federal agencies, the majority of the work that we end up doing is reactive in nature, and we end up responding to issues. I think one of the reasons that people love this project is that it's proactive, and Nature Conservancy gave us a really ambitious and broad scale challenge to meet. They helped us prove that it was possible to do it, and then they walked away and said, all right, you guys are on your own and you guys got to make this work. But I think the thing that motivates people is that we're fixing old problems, we're seeing tremendous progress, but we're getting to plan it. And so people are very, Bill Zedike likes to say that there are no bad ideas. And Teresa Chapman at Nature Conservancy has also said there are no bad projects. They're just projects that respond faster than others. And so really what we're doing is, you know, we seize opportunities. We have a list of priorities that we try to work on. We use science, we use models to try and guide our principles or our projects. But if an opportunity opens up, a landowner that may not have participated in the past says, I like what you're doing, will you come look at our project? We go and look at them, and we adapt and change as opportunities arise. You know, but it's a lot of communication, and it's being flexible. You know, this year is a great example. We had a lot of plans in January, and now we have a totally different set of plans here in June, and I imagine by October they'll change again. But I think the key thing is the fact that as long as people are we keep people informed of what we're doing and where we're going. You know, I got a phone call today from National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and we've been approved for a grant, and I don't know how many people have had this opportunity, but he basically said, hey, would there be a problem if we added $150,000 to your existing grant? Because they've seen us put projects on the ground and spend money effectively and efficiently, and they're seeing results. And so they had this money that they had to get spent by September of 2021, and I didn't turn it down.
So wise. So that's great. So some of the things I've been just jotting down that might be things that you could maybe generalize from, but then I'd love for each of you to take a minute or two and offer lessons learned or advice that we can generalize this. But some of the stuff I've heard is starting with the person who has a skill for pulling tons of diverse people together in the same room and facilitating a good first conversation. Sounded like you had the mega question of climate change, but you also had a really tangible catalyst, which was the sage grouse, which was on everybody's mind. So you had both the big picture and something really concrete to take action around. The fact that each of your agencies has different, not only your agencies, but all of the other many partners you mentioned have different resources they can put in. Some of you have time, some of you have cash, some of you have access to different funding sources, some of you have student labor or data geeks who can work on the evaluation, so everybody's got something to put onto the table. The fact that you've just got the synergy of all of this means that it's one of those 2 + 2 = 12 kind of things. It allows you to be proactive in addressing real problems in a real way that are meaningful to people here from different roles in life. I've also heard a lot about communication and the personal relationships among you, which probably has been one of the factors that's allowed for the flexibility that you need when push comes to shove. So those are some of the, well, actually, and then I heard this conversation we had in our staff meeting the other day, everybody's saying mission creep is dangerous. And if you get into collaborations, you're maybe doing something that's a little outside what you usually do or what maybe you were formed to do. And isn't this a bad thing for nonprofits? So it also means that maybe the partners, at least some of the nonprofit partners, may need to look at things in a slightly different way, and not mission creep, but mission expansion, or making mission relevant to today's time. But Nate, Andrew, Paul, George, just a minute or two about lessons learned, advice you might pass on to somebody who wants to get in bed with a strange bedfellow. What would you offer us?
Well, I guess I'll start off and say that if you're going to come to the table, got to keep an open mind. Obviously, we're all kind of doing this work for different reasons. You know, when we're working on private land, that rancher may not really have the interests or the desire to really be enhancing wildlife habitat. He wants to see how we can grow more grass on the land, and that's okay. We can do that. He needs to understand if I'm bringing money to his ranch, then I want to see it go more towards the wildlife habitat improvement. But if Andrew's bringing money, he probably wants to see better water retention and a better wet meadow than result. So we all kind of have our own little objectives, but we can put our differences aside and keep open minds. And as you said, that communication is key. And I was thinking earlier today, just the very nature of this work, you have to do it through teamwork. I mean, I cannot go out there and lift in a day several 100 pounds, maybe 1,000 pounds of rock without some help to build these structures. So, you know, maybe Andrew and I are disagreeing on our next treatment site. That's okay. The two of us will put our differences aside and work together, and we're going to get the task done that we need to at that day. And then we can step back and look at what we accomplished at the end of the day and say, yeah, hey, this is good work. And, you know, maybe it doesn't matter if we don't go to my site, but let's do your site, and we have a little give and take, and it works well. So I appreciate my teammates and just their personalities and how hard they work. So it is a great partnership, and this work definitely drives collaboration. So
that sounds wonderful. Andrew, you're still muted, but we'd love to hear from you. What's your advice? What's something significant you'd want us all to know?
Two things. Yeah. Thanks, Nate. Yeah. This is an excellent partnership, and just being able to work with, you know, everyone here. And, you know, there's a couple things, and even Paul's kind of mentioned it. Well, first I'm going to say is, you know, Betsy Neely, you know, was the first coordinator for this group, working for the Nature Conservancy. And so one thing is that she listened to everyone. And that's, you know, I think a lot of us tend to hear things, but she listened. You know, like, you know, we had someone, you know, who's concerned about the rock, that, you know, we're using granite, which, you know, is inert. There's no chemicals that are going to leach out of that. And this person thought, you know, oh, if we're going to change the water chemistry, you know, of, you know, these systems. And, you know, we listened and we looked into it. And that's part of like Betsy Neal. And she's brought that, and that's been something that, Tom Grant was the previous meadow restoration coordinator, and then Paul Jones. It's listening, and just kind of like, hey, we'll see what, you have a concern, and we're going to listen and we're going to look into it. Being adaptable is a really big thing too. I mean, just like this year, we had a plan, Paul mentioned we had a big old plan to do a lot of work with Youth Corps and volunteers, and doing other outreach events. And it's just with COVID, we got to be safe. We're following, Gunnison, policy. And we want to be safe, and we want to make sure that we have that trust. Yeah, we want to go we want to restore, reconnect, 100 acres of music meadow, but we're not going to, put, the safety and health of people at risk, so that's a big thing there. And then, the thing that Paul mentioned is via bill, no idea is a bad idea. You just kind of bring everything to the table, and then you kind of look at it and you assess it, and it's just kind of bring it in. Nate with Nate and Matt Vasquez of the Forest Service with their wildlife, input. Maybe me with a little hydrology, Bill Zedike and Sean Connor, from a planning standpoint. Then we have, our botanists and our plant people, because we have, so it's just kind of integrating everyone. And then, like Paul's got, Paul's an expert wildlife biologist, but he's kind of he is being very humble, and he's deferring a lot of this to Nate, and I'm sure Matt now. I mean, but he's been involved in this. He knows, he knows the ecosystem, he knows the people here, which is awesome. But he's really the one who's kind of like, the conductor right now. And just you really need someone to kind of conduct and kind of like herd everyone in for a common purpose and common goal.
Are you, Andrew, are you the guy that every so often George says, I've got to go down to the brewery and meet with the Wet Meadows guys? Are you the one that started that?
Yeah, so we just try to do like some informal watershed gatherings of folks, who are, it's maybe soils folks, water hydrologists, snow surveyors, the fish biologists, and just do kind of like a little informal get together. We've done breakfast, but Frank Kugel, the former general manager, and George were a little thirsty, so we had to move it to a place that served libations for to kind of meet their needs.
Well, and I think the important moral of that story is the kind of parallel importance of the formal relationships with what each of you knows and the expertise you bring to it, balanced with the informal relationship that allows for the communication and the trust and all of that kind of thing. George, what advice would you pass on?
Well, I think a real key is the people that are involved in this. And we've had people here with the land management agencies for whom this just would not have been something they wanted to do. And to have Nate and Andrew and Matt really are the, I think, the spark plugs of the thing. They've all been with it from pretty much day one, and they love doing it. I just last week I was out with Andrew and Paul and Nate, who were up in Cabin Creek laying out some plans, and just it took about 4 hours to walk 400 feet up that gulch that we were looking at. But every step of the way, it's discussion. It's nobody's actually in charge of the thing. They are all in charge of it, and it works. There was a big discussion about something that would have something they could have done that would have been a relatively quick improvement in some habitat, but it would have not been good for some stream building work farther down the stream. And just the discussion about that, and the fact that it got resolved, that you can do both, and but they have to be done in sequence. It just, the respect that they have for each other and the ideas they bring and the kinds of people that they are is what's making this work to me. And that's, I'm sorry that Matt couldn't be here. I wrote and asked him if he had anything he would like to have said if he could have been here, and he sent back, he said, from the U.S. Forest Service perspective, we're grateful for the shared stewardship the wet meadow restoration collaboration represents and the holistic approach to more effectively accomplish the resource benefits to ecosystem services, wildlife, and people across public and private lands. And that it's kind of people that are working on this that make it work. And Paul's really jumped in with enthusiasm for it. I think that ultimately this is the kind of thing that could change the way things get done on the public lands and private lands over the whole watershed systems in the valleys like this. And it's very important what's happening here. And it's been acknowledged by national awards. I don't remember the exact names, but maybe Nate and Andrew remember what.
I was thinking one was the North American Climate Adaptation Strategy. Was that right, Paul? Did that...
Okay. I feel better about getting the Upper Gunnison's name wrong.
But this is people are watching this all over the country too, and this is.
Well, and it also sounds from what you just said, and then I'll have Paul wind us up with his thoughts, is that it needs to be the kind of people who don't need to make sure that all the credit belongs to them or to their personal agency, and are willing to be generous in support of the whole and recognize that they're playing a part. So Paul, what wisdom do you offer us?
You know, I think one of the things, one of the key structures we build is the One Rock Dam. You know, and the whole idea of the One Rock Dam is that you've got water that's moving through a drainage and it's moving too fast. It's carrying a lot of material with it. And the purpose of the One Rock Dam is not to impound water. It's to slow the water down so that soil settles out. But I love the One Rock Dam from the perspective, just its name alone, I think is really emblematic of the way this project works. We're working on restoring ecosystem stability. We're building ecosystem resilience. We're restoring sage-grouse habitat. We're improving forage for wildlife and livestock. We're increasing the amount of water that is available to landowners. And we're doing it one rock at a time. And when you see the scale of the problem, it seems overwhelming. But at the end of the day, when you see a structure that's built out of individual rocks that have been laid by individual people, and you walk away and you realize, and then you go back the next year and you see the effect of that one rock dam and that one rock, and people are invested in it emotionally because they've put sweat and tears and a little bit of blood maybe into those
finger too.
And yeah, and you know, and it's, I think that in and of itself, that whole, these are small structures. The structures themselves are an example of humility. We're not isn't a big structure that somebody's going to look at in, you know, the Hoover Dam or something like that. It's a whole series of these little structures. So, and one rock at a time, we can heal the system. And but it like Nate so eloquently put it, you can't build that by yourself. You have to have other people to help. And I think that's once people have a chance to work on this, it's very collaborative. You can't do it without collaboration. You know, one of the things I'm seeing as a coordinator is it's really easy to get pulled into that mission creep, in the sense that everybody wants your help and everybody wants you to do things. And it's really, it would be really easy to spend a whole bunch of time in other places working, but I work for primarily for the Upper Gunnison River Water Conservancy District. About 20% of my time is outside of the basin. And so it forces me, as a coordinator, I have to sometimes push other places to try and build that collaboration. Hopefully, it'll start, and hopefully we can be an example for that. You know, but I have to constantly remind people in the other populations that, look, we can help you get started, but you have to carry this on your own. And so we'll see if that can happen in these smaller populations where they don't have a long history of the collaboration that we do. And I think that in the long run, we can get there. But it is, I think, you know, a word of caution on these things would be, it's easy to get too big too fast. And when you look at the size and the scale, there's more work here in the Gunnison Basin alone than any of us will complete in our lifetimes. And when you spread that out over the entire sagebrush ecosystem, or the Southwest, you know, other people are going to have to step up and do it. But I really do believe that this project and the people here can set a great example for what can happen when people do decide to go. Thank you, Nate. One rock at a time.
One rock,
it's great. There's the one rock. I love it. So you can change the world one rock at a time.
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, just sort of the big vision, and recognizing that if everybody plays a part, it can get done.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to do systemic change, which is presumably what most collaborations are created to do, that's how it has to be. What an awesome way to wind up. You know, we usually try to tell people that we'll end right at 5, but if anyone wants to stay for a few minutes, or can stay for a few minutes and lob some questions at these presenters, that would be just swell. So does anyone have questions? Yeah, James.
Yeah, so listening to this, and I'm trying to find all the parallels that I want to take from your story and apply to the grants that we're researching for immigrants and non-citizen people in the Gunnison County. And I think one that really stands out is sort of your target concentration, where you decide, okay, we're going to pick this particular zone and we're going to apply funds here. And I'm trying to think, like, how do you do that? How do you pick and choose within the Gunnison County for sort of neglected community members who may even not be on the books, may not have, you know, they're probably not reporting to the census. And so there's a problem of mutually excluding one zone in favor of the other. And so when we're talking about humans that may be sort of nestled in or concentrated in Gunnison proper or Crested Butte versus others that are scattered around, I'm trying to think, like, where do we focus the resources that we end up getting? More like, how would you approach that issue philosophically, I guess, as a coordinator and a manager and as a team?
Wow.
Yeah, I was just thinking as I was listening to their story, it started with Betsy from the Nature Conservancy getting all of the stakeholders in a single place. to explore the elements of the issue. Would that be the place to start?
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't be here if Nature Conservancy hadn't stepped in and said, you know, they were responsible for bringing us all together and focusing our efforts on the issue of climate change. And then she took that and kind of boiled the essence down and picked a few high priorities. And the first priority, one of the first priorities that was really evident was the needs of Gunnison sage-grouse and how the ecosystem that they're in is an arid ecosystem, and their need for these mesic environments was really, really high, and those mesic environments are vulnerable through climate change. And so she was able to basically craft the overall image of what we were going to do. And then through Nature Conservancy funding and then some funding from, I think it was the Wildlife Conservation Society, had enough time to work on it for 5 years. And I guess, James, you know, I'm not an expert in people, but I do think what's really important is to build that vision where you have the broad parameters of what you know, the climate change is the big issue, but the focal point was Gunnison sage-grouse. And then from that, picking, prioritizing which drainages we're going to work in. You know, there are myriad of ways of doing that. But I think the essential thing is having a really clear description of what the overall big question is, and how can we address it in a really defined. You know, the bird was something that people could wrap their minds around, and the bird's needs. You know, climate change is such a huge issue. It's so daunting. You know, how can we in Gunnison deal with a climate that's changing when it's driven by burning of fossil fuels nation and worldwide? But what she was able to do was to bring that down to a focal point that was already well established within the community. And then from there, we're able to step back and move towards that bigger picture. But I think it was really essential having that vision and having that overall big picture and micro focus as well.
So it could be the big issue, I'm making this up, James, sorry, but could be the big issue could be equity and integration of the immigrants, and the immediate issue could be ensuring that people who have lost their job because they're service workers and don't have any other recourse can make it through the summer in terms of food and rent. Something like that, as well as just getting a whole bunch of, I would imagine, getting a whole bunch of different diverse stakeholders in the room. So the people who are the immigrants themselves, of course, the people who serve the immigrants, but then as well, the business community who wants to make sure that the immigrants feel comfortable coming into their stores, feel welcome, whatever, so that people can arrive at a common understanding of the big picture as well as the small one. I don't know what for the.
I'd like to just point out that I'd like to point out that when the Nature Conservancy came here, they didn't dictate to us what we needed to do here at a local level. They brought all these different individuals, agencies, angles into one room, and then they really just let us work through what were the priorities for us, and then basically come up and propose how we wanted to go about trying to implement some kind of a solution. So, I mean, they were all ears, which was great. They just listened, and it was really supportive. And imagine those conversations talking about climate change and how that's going to impact the Gunnison Basin landscape and our economy here. And I mean, it's obviously we had the whole spectrum of different attitudes having that conversation, but again, the solution came from everyone's collective thoughts in discussion. And so
That's
we were
great.
lucky to also have that good history of the sage grouse working group already broken the ice for us. So
taking advantage of the things that already exist. And also one of the mantras of our community foundation is do things with people, not for people. So being able to make your own decisions. So again, for James, that might be the immigrants making their own decisions about what the most relevant approaches so that they can take next steps might be too.
I think that's the only way they can feel empowered.
You bet.
Yep.
One other thing, that, I mean, and just to kind of add on to Nate and Paul, so, you know, the Nature Conservancy hired experts, you know, in the field to bring the science, you know. So they brought in, you know, climate experts from NOAA, Western Watershed Assessment, University of Colorado. They brought vegetation and, you know, and animal experts from Colorado Natural Heritage Program. So they sought out this extra outside scientific data to kind of present to us. So they didn't kind of like, you know, come in with their data and just kind of, you know, present it. They brought, you know, the leaders in that. And then it allowed us to kind of make, like Nate mentioned, make those decisions on those, what priority system do we want to hit? Because there are like 65 vulnerable ecosystems that popped out. And so, I mean, and, you know, we're very fortunate in that the working group was already established, you know. I mean, we could have gone to the Alpine, you know, and worked up there, but there's no one really working up there. And so we already had a foundation there, but we also have the science to back this up. So I think that was key. You just need good, sound data that's objective.
That's great. George, would you add anything and then we can wind up?
Just you need something that everybody's thinking about to across all of the organizations. Everybody was thinking about climate change, as Paul said, but we were also all thinking about the sage grouse, and that included private individuals who, and there was concern, there was an element of fear to that. What happens if it's declared an endangered species and the federal plan gets kicked into action, and all kinds of things start to happen then that you don't really have control over. And so everybody's got to be thinking about whatever you decide to be pull a collaboration together around.
That's great. So it is about 10 after 5. Two things. We've recorded this meeting and it's going to be posted. So we'll be sharing the link with you. And also I'm taking notes and I'll run them by Paul to make sure I haven't misunderstood anything. And I've got a couple of very good, very short kind of how-to pieces on collaboration that I will post. It's kind of a checklist that I found invaluable for what makes for an effective person in a collaboration, a situation to take advantage of. So there's several different categories of things you might want to look at. But for right now, I just want to say on behalf of the Community Foundation, thanks to Paul, Nate, Andrew, and George. It was really helpful, and there were just so many things that you can pull out of it. And I think whether our work is in soccer, arts, youth mentoring, or whatever, travel coordination, or planting food, and the immigrant equity, there are things that I think we've all learned and can be really, really useful. So thank you so very, very much for your time, and congratulations on all the awards. Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Again.
Thanks.